There is a quiet tension that appears whenever a truly unique woman enters an ordinary room. She doesn't announce herself. She doesn't compete. She simply is, and yet something shifts. Conversations stiffen. Eyes measure. Smiles become cautious. This reaction is not coincidence. It is not jealousy alone. It is not arrogance. It is something deeper, something rooted in the mind itself. Average minds are not weak because they lack intelligence. They struggle because uniqueness forces confrontation, and confrontation awakens what most people spend their lives avoiding. This is the reason unique women are often misunderstood, resisted, or subtly diminished, not because they are doing something wrong, but because they are doing something rare. Uniqueness has a way of entering a room quietly and yet rearranging everything inside it. It does not raise its voice or demand attention, but the moment it appears, something in others begins to stir. A unique woman does not confront people directly. She confronts them indirectly. By simply existing as she is, her presence acts like a mirror placed before the inner life of others, and many turn away not because they dislike what they see in her, but because they are unsettled by what they see in themselves. Every human being carries unresolved inner conflicts, parts of the self that were silenced, postponed, or buried in the name of belonging. These conflicts form when a person learns, often early in life, that certain traits are inconvenient or unsafe. Curiosity may be replaced with compliance. Sensitivity may be masked by indifference. Authentic desire may be exchanged for approval. Over time, these abandoned parts do not disappear. They retreat into the unconscious where they wait. A unique woman, by living in alignment with her inner truth, unknowingly awakens these sleeping fragments in others. This is why her presence feels intense to the average mind. She reminds people of the choices they did not make, the courage they did not claim, and the voice they learned to quiet. Psychological research on self-discrepancy shows that when individuals are confronted with someone who embodies traits they once valued but later suppressed, they experience discomfort, defensiveness, or even hostility. The reaction is rarely conscious. Instead of recognizing the pain of their own inner division, they project it outward, attributing their unease to her behavior, her confidence, or her difference. Consider a woman who speaks thoughtfully rather than automatically, who pauses before agreeing, who listens to her intuition even when it leads her off the familiar path, to someone who has learned to survive by pleasing others. This is deeply unsettling. Her self-trust exposes their self-betrayal. Her calm highlights their internal noise. Her clarity reveals their confusion. None of this is intentional on her part, yet the effect is undeniable. She does not accuse, but her existence asks a question many are not prepared to answer. Who might you have been if you had not abandoned yourself? People often respond to this inner confrontation by attempting to diminish what they cannot integrate. They may label her as intimidating, distant, or too much. These labels serve as psychological defenses, allowing the observer to preserve their existing identity without examining its fractures. It is far easier to critique uniqueness than to reconcile one's own inner conflict. In this way, average minds protect themselves, not from her, but from the uncomfortable truth she awakens. There is also grief hidden beneath this reaction. When unresolved inner conflict is stirred, it brings with it a mourning for lost possibilities. A unique woman embodies a life lived with greater coherence between inner values and outer actions. For those who feel trapped in roles they never consciously chose, this can evoke sadness, envy, and fear all at once. Rather than feeling inspired, they feel exposed. Rather than feeling curious, they feel threatened. The psyche, seeking equilibrium, resists what it perceives as destabilizing. Yet this exposure is not cruelty, it is invitation. Uniqueness does not exist to shame the ordinary, but to remind it of its own unrealized depth. The discomfort people feel around a unique woman is evidence not of her arrogance, but of her psychological integration. She has faced parts of herself that others have avoided. She has made peace with contradictions rather than burying them. In doing so, she carries an inner coherence that unsettles those still divided within. Real-life examples of this dynamic appear everywhere. In workplaces, individuals who remain authentic rather than politically adaptive are often met with subtle resistance despite their competence. In families, those who break generational patterns are labeled rebellious or difficult. In relationships, a woman who knows herself deeply can trigger insecurity in those who rely on external validation for stability. In each case, the reaction is not caused by her actions alone, but by the unresolved conflicts she brings to the surface. To encounter a unique woman is to encounter a choice. One can turn away, harden, and protect the familiar self-image, or one can reflect, question, and begin the slow work of inner reconciliation. Many choose the former, because the latter requires courage. It requires acknowledging that the discomfort she evokes is not an attack, but a signal that something within longs to be reclaimed. Uniqueness exposes unresolved inner conflict, not because it seeks to disrupt, but because truth naturally illuminates what has been hidden. And illumination is rarely comfortable at first, yet, for those willing to endure their discomfort, it becomes the beginning of wholeness. A unique woman does not demand transformation from others, but she makes it difficult to remain unchanged, and that, more than anything else, is what the average mind struggles to handle. The average mind is shaped by an unspoken agreement with the world. In exchange for belonging, it will surrender a portion of its freedom. This agreement is rarely conscious. It begins early, when approval becomes safer than authenticity. Fitting in feels wiser than standing apart. Over time, safety becomes a guiding principle, not only in behavior, but in thought, emotion, and identity. The average mind learns to move within familiar boundaries, to repeat what has already been validated, to choose what feels secure over what feels true. A unique woman lives by a different inner law, not because she rejects safety outright, but because she refuses to let fear decide the shape of her life. Freedom, for her, is not rebellion or chaos. It is inner permission. She listens to the quiet authority within herself and allows it to guide her choices, even when those choices are misunderstood. This alone places her outside the psychological comfort zone of many, because her freedom highlights the invisible constraints others have accepted as normal. Safety is comforting because it is predictable. It tells the mind what to expect and how to behave. Freedom, on the other hand, introduces uncertainty. It asks questions instead of repeating answers. It requires responsibility rather than obedience. When people encounter a woman who thinks independently, feels deeply, and acts in alignment with her inner values, they are confronted with a life not governed by fear-based rules. This confrontation can feel destabilizing to those who rely on structure to avoid inner chaos. Psychologically, safety is often a defense mechanism. It protects the individual from risk, rejection, and the pain of failure. But it also protects from growth. Studies in behavioral psychology show that people frequently choose familiar dissatisfaction over unfamiliar possibility. The known discomfort feels safer than the unknown potential. A unique woman challenges this pattern simply by embodying an alternative. She demonstrates that it is possible to live without constant permission, to make choices rooted in self-trust rather than social approval. Her freedom is often misinterpreted as defiance or arrogance, but it is neither. It is the result of inner work. She has faced the fear that keeps most people compliant, and has chosen not to let it rule her. This does not make her fearless, it makes her honest. She feels uncertainty, but she does not allow it to dictate her identity. To the average mind, this appears reckless. In truth, it is deeply grounded. In everyday life, this difference becomes visible in subtle ways. In conversations, she does not automatically agree to maintain harmony. In relationships, she does not shrink to preserve attachment. In careers, she does not remain in roles that slowly erode her sense of self. These choices are not loud, but they are powerful, and they unsettle those who have learned to survive by minimizing themselves. Her freedom exposes the cost of safety when safety becomes a cage. The discomfort others feel is not caused by her actions alone, but by the internal comparison they cannot avoid. When someone has built their life around avoiding risk, encountering a woman who chooses authenticity over approval can awaken buried regret. It raises questions they have learned not to ask. What did I silence to stay accepted? What dream did I postpone to stay secure? What part of myself did I trade for comfort? These questions are threatening not because they are unanswerable, but because answering them would require change. Society often reinforces this tension. Systems are designed to reward predictability, non-individuality. People who follow established paths are praised as responsible, while those who deviate are viewed with suspicion. A unique woman disrupts this conditioning. She does not wait for permission to evolve. She moves according to an inner compass, rather than external validation. This challenges the belief that safety is the highest good and exposes the quiet emptiness that can follow a life lived entirely within approved limits. Yet freedom has a cost. It requires facing loneliness, misunderstanding, and uncertainty. Many avoid it not because they lack courage, but because they fear isolation. A unique woman has learned that belonging to herself is more essential than belonging to everyone else. This realization is both liberating and confronting. It forces others to recognize how much of their identity is maintained through conformity rather than conviction. When average minds encounter such freedom, they often attempt to reduce it. They may call her unrealistic, irresponsible, or impractical. These judgments serve to restore a logical balance, allowing them to reaffirm their own choices without examining their limitation. It is easier to dismiss freedom than to admit that safety has become a substitute for living. But freedom is not the enemy of safety, it is its deeper evolution. True safety arises not from avoiding risk, but from trusting one's capacity to respond to life. A unique woman embodies this truth. She shows that security does not come from rigid structures, but from inner resilience. And this realization, once seen, cannot be unseen. For those willing to look beyond their fear, her freedom becomes not a threat, but an invitation to step beyond survival and begin truly living. Power is rarely what it appears to be on the surface. It does not always announce itself through authority, status, or dominance. More often, it lives quietly in unspoken agreements: who leads, who follows, who is approved, and who is allowed to belong. These agreements are formed unconsciously, shaped by fear, habit, and the deep human need for acceptance. Most people learn, without ever naming it, how to adjust themselves to fit into these invisible structures. They sense where approval flows and where it withdraws, and they adapt accordingly. This adaptation becomes so automatic that it feels natural, even necessary. A unique woman enters these dynamics without negotiating herself first. She does not study the room to determine who she must become in order to be accepted. Her sense of self is not borrowed from and the expectations of others, but rooted in an inner alignment that does not shift with changing approval. This alone alters the balance of power. When someone cannot be controlled through praise or diminished through disapproval, the usual mechanisms of influence begin to fail. What once worked no longer applies, and this failure is deeply unsettling to those who rely on it. Unconscious power dynamics depend on predictability. They function because people know how to respond to reward and punishment. Approval keeps them compliant. Rejection keeps them cautious. A unique woman does not reject these signals out of defiance, but because they do not define her worth. She may appreciate recognition, but she does not depend on it. She may feel exclusion, but she does not collapse under it. This emotional independence quietly disrupts the hierarchy. It reveals that much of what passes for power is sustained only by collective agreement. Psychological studies on social influence show that individuals who are less dependent on external validation are perceived as more threatening even when they are not confrontational. This threat is not physical or intellectual, it is symbolic. Their presence exposes the fragile foundation of control. If one person can remain whole without constant affirmation, then the system that distributes worth through approval begins to look less absolute. For those invested in maintaining that system, this realization provokes anxiety in everyday setting. This disruption often appears subtle. In conversations, she speaks when she has something true to say, not when silence would earn her favor. In groups, she does not align automatically with the dominant opinion. In relationships, she does not surrender her boundaries to preserve harmony. These choices may seem small, but they carry psychological weight. They communicate, without words, that her identity is not negotiable. For those accustomed to influencing others through emotional leverage, this is disorienting. The reaction to such disruption is rarely conscious. Instead of recognizing their discomfort as a response to lost control, people often attribute it to her personality. She is labeled difficult, distant, or intimidating. These labels serve a purpose. They reframe the imbalance of power as a personal flaw rather than a structural shift. By defining her as the problem, the system protects itself from examination. This is how unconscious dynamics preserve themselves, by pathologizing what cannot be controlled. There's also fear beneath this reaction. When a unique woman breaks unconscious power dynamics, she reveals how much of one's sense of importance depends on others' compliance. For someone who derives identity from being needed, admired, or deferred to, her independence feels like erasure. She does not need to challenge authority openly. Her self-sufficiency does that for her. It asks an unspoken question: if I do not need your approval, what power do you truly have over me? This question can awaken deep insecurity. Many people have never explored who they are outside the roles they perform for others. Their influence, their value, even their sense of self may be tied to how much they are needed or obeyed. A unique woman threatens this arrangement not by opposing it, but by transcending it. She relates as an equal, not a subordinate or a superior. Equality, for those invested in hierarchy, can feel like loss. History and social patterns repeatedly demonstrate this response. Individuals who refuse to conform to expected roles are often resisted before they are understood. Women who do not seek validation through submission are perceived as disruptive, even when they act with integrity and respect. The discomfort they evoke is a signal that an unconscious dynamic has been disturbed. Something automatic has been interrupted, forcing awareness where there was one. Habit. Yet this disruption is not destructive. It is transformative. Unconscious power dynamics limit both those who hold power and those who submit to it. They keep relationships shallow and interactions predictable. When a unique woman enters with inner autonomy, she introduces the possibility of a different kind of connection, one based on mutual respect rather than control. This possibility is frightening because it requires maturity. It demands that influence be earned through authenticity rather than enforced through fear. For those willing to reflect, her prison, C becomes an invitation to examine their own dependence on approval and authority. It offers a chance to reclaim power, not as dominance, but as self-ownership. For those unwilling, it becomes easier to reject her than to confront the illusion she exposes. And so uniqueness continues to unsettle, not because it seeks to overthrow, but because it reveals that much of what governs human behavior rests on agreements that no longer need to be obeyed. The unknown has always stirred something primal in the human psyche. It is the space beyond certainty, beyond routine, beyond the carefully constructed maps by which most people navigate their lives. For the average mind, the unknown represents danger, instability, and loss of control. It is something to be minimized, categorized, or avoided. Yet a unique woman does not merely step into the unknown, she carries it with her. She embodies ambiguity, depth, and contradiction, and in doing so, she awakens a fear that many have spent their lives learning to suppress. Most people rely on mental structures that help them feel safe. They prefer clear labels, predictable roles, and familiar patterns. These structures reduce anxiety by telling the mind what to expect and how to respond. When a woman appears who does not fit neatly into these categories, the mind struggles. She may be both gentle and firm, introspective and expressive, independent yet deeply connected. This complexity resists simplification, and what cannot be simplified often becomes threatening. The fear she activates is not of her actions, but of the uncertainty she represents. Psychological research shows that the brain is wired to seek cognitive closure. People feel more comfortable when situations, identities, and relationships are clearly defined. Ambiguity requires mental effort and emotional tolerance. A unique woman demands both. She does not offer immediate answers or predictable responses. She invites presence rather than assumption. For those accustomed to navigating life through scripts and expectations, this feels like standing on unstable ground. Her presence unsettles because it exposes the limits of control. The average mind wants to know who someone is, how they will behave, and what is expected in return. A unique woman cannot be fully anticipated. She listens inward before reacting outward. She evolves rather than remains fixed. This unpredictability is often misinterpreted as inconsistency, but it is the natural result of a living, reflective inner life. The fear it provokes comes from the realization that not everything can be managed through familiar rules. In relationships, this fear often emerges as anxiety. People want reassurance through patterns they understand. They want predictable affection, predictable roles, predictable outcomes. A unique woman does not withhold connection, but she does not perform it either. She relates authentically, responding to the moment rather than to expectation. This requires others to be present rather than strategic, honest rather than rehearsed. For many, this level of engagement feels risky because it removes the safety net of pretense. The unknown she activates also touches deeper existential fears. She represents growth, change, and transformation forces that disrupt stable identities. To truly engage with her, one must be willing to evolve. This is not a small demand. Growth requires letting go of familiar versions of the self. It means questioning beliefs, habits, and assumptions that once provided comfort. A unique woman stands as living evidence that such transformation is possible, and that possibility can feel threatening to the invested in remaining the same. Society often responds to this fear by attempting to define what it cannot understand. Labels are assigned, assumptions are made, narratives are created. She is described as mysterious, complicated, or intense. These descriptions serve to domesticate the unknown, to reduce it to something manageable. By naming her, people believe they have contained her, yet the fear persists, because the source of discomfort is not her nature, but the uncertainty she awakens with others. In professional settings, this fear can manifest as resistance to unconventional thinkers. Individuals who approach problems from unexpected angles are often met with skepticism before their contributions are recognized. The same dynamic applies to unique women. Their ideas may challenge established methods, not because they seek disruption, but because they see possibilities others overlook. The fear of the unknown causes people to cling to familiar strategies even when they are no longer effective. At a deeper level, the fear she activates is a fear of the unconscious. The unknown is not only external, it is internal. A unique woman often has a strong relationship with her inner world. She has explored her doubts, contradictions, and desires rather than suppressing them. This inner familiarity gives her depth that others sense, even if they cannot articulate it. For those who have avoided their own inner landscapes, her depth feels overwhelming. She reminds them that there is more within them than they have dared to explore. This fear does not mean she is dangerous. It means she is alive in a way that resists reduction. The unknown she carries is not chaos, but potential. It is the space where creativity, insight, and renewal are born. Those who learn to sit with this uncertainty often find themselves expanded by it. They discover that what they feared was not destruction, but transformation. Yet many turn away before reaching this realization. They retreat into certainty, routine, and labels, convincing themselves that the unknown is something to be avoided. In doing so, they miss the invitation she offers not to abandon safety entirely, but to redefine it. True security does not come from eliminating uncertainty, but from developing the inner strength to face it. A unique man embodies this strength. She shows that the unknown is not an enemy, but a doorway, and the fear she awakens is not a warning, but a signal that something deeper is waiting to be discovered. Transformation is rarely welcomed at first. It arrives quietly, disguised as discomfort, tension, or resistance. Most people believe they want change, yet what they truly desire is improvement without disruption. They wish for growth that does not disturb identity, certainty, or routine. A unique woman challenges this illusion. She does not demand transformation from others, but her presence makes stagnation visible. Simply by living in alignment with her inner truth, she becomes a living invitation to evolve, and not everyone is prepared to accept it. Human beings build identities around what feels familiar. These identities are reinforced by habits, relationships, and social roles that offer stability. Over time, stability can become a substitute for meaning. People learn how to function, how to perform, how to belong, and they call this a life. Transformation threatens this structure because it asks a dangerous question: is what you are living truly who you are? A unique woman carries this question within her. She has already asked it of herself, and her answer has reshaped her choices. For those who have avoided that question, her presence feels unsettling. The discomfort she evokes often has little to do with her actions. It arises from the contrast she represents. She has confronted her fears instead of arranging her life around them. She has examined inherited beliefs instead of accepting them unquestioned. She has chosen authenticity over ease, even when it required loss or misunderstanding. This makes her a mirror to others' unrealized potential. And mirrors are really gentle when they reflect what has been neglected. Psychological research on change. Resistance shows that people often defend existing identities, even when those identities cause dissatisfaction. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar growth. When someone embodies transformation, it destabilizes this defense. A unique woman shows that change is possible, that inner freedom is attainable, and that self-betrayal is not inevitable. For those who are not ready to let go of their old structures, this realization feels like pressure rather than inspiration. In relationships, this dynamic becomes especially visible. A unique woman does not relate from fear of abandonment or need for validation. She connects from choice, not dependency. This level of emotional responsibility can feel demanding to those who rely on unconscious patterns to maintain closeness. Her presence invites honesty, self-reflection, and growth. To engage with her fully, one must become more conscious. Many would rather retreat than rise to that level of awareness. Transformation also threatens collective norms. Societies function through shared assumptions about what is acceptable, realistic, or possible. A unique woman quietly challenges these assumptions. She lives beyond prescribed limits, redefining success, fulfillment, and identity on her own terms. This can provoke resistance, not because she is wrong, but because she exposes how much of what is considered normal is actually inherited and unexamined. Change at this level is not merely personal, it is symbolic. The reaction to this invitation often takes the form of dismissal. She may be labeled unrealistic, difficult, or impractical. These judgments serve as psychological shields, protecting others from confronting their own inertia. By framing her transformation as abnormal, people can preserve the belief that their own stagnation is reasonable. This is not cruelty, it is fear. Fear of losing what is known, even if it no longer nourishes the soul. Yet transformation cannot be avoided indefinitely. What is resisted outwardly often manifests inwardly as restlessness, dissatisfaction, or quiet despair. A unique woman embodies an alternative path, one that acknowledges fear but does not submit to it. She demonstrates that transformation is not a sudden event, but a gradual process of aligning inner truth with outer life. This alignment requires courage, patience, and a willingness to stand alone. At times, those who are ready feel something different in her presence. They may feel challenged, but also awakened. Her life does not accuse them, it invites them. It suggests that growth is not about becoming someone else, but about returning to what was once abandoned. The tension she creates becomes a catalyst rather than a threat. It moves them towards self-inquiry instead of defensiveness. Not everyone will respond this way, and that is natural. Transformation cannot be forced. It unfolds when the psyche is ready to release old forms. A unique woman understands this, even if it costs her connection with those who cannot follow. She does not shrink to make others comfortable, nor does she demand that they change. She trusts that each person must meet transformation in their own time. In this sense, uniqueness is not superiority, it is responsibility. It carries the weight of walking ahead without certainty of who will walk alongside. It means embodying change without guarantees of acceptance. Yet it also carries quiet hope, because even those who resist today may remember her presence tomorrow, when their own inner unrest becomes impossible to ignore. And in that memory, the invitation she once represented may finally find fertile ground. A unique woman is not meant to be handled, she is meant to be met. Those who cannot meet her where she stands will always attempt to lower her to where they are comfortable. But uniqueness was never meant to be diluted. It exists to awaken, to challenge, and to remind the world that depth still matters even when makes people uncomfortable, and that discomfort is not her burden to carry.